Welcome to Great Books, Big Ideas. My name's Jim. Thanks for joining me. Well, I have begun my reread of Marcel Proust, In Search of Lost Time. And I have joined the Marcel Proust read-along in 2025, which is co-hosted by Randy Ray, the literate Texan, and Greg at Another Bibliophile Reads. And they came up with this idea to read the entirety of In Search of Lost Time, all 6/7 volumes, at a rate of roughly 10 pages a day. And that should get you through the whole thing in 1 year. And I thought, wow, this sounds like great fun. It took me many years to complete my first read-through of In Search of Lost Time, Remembrance of Things Past, it used to be known as. And I've been itching to read these new translations, so this gave me a perfect opportunity to do that. Randy and Greg will also be hosting discussions on Discord. I believe they're already doing that, and they will be issuing videos, as will other people who are participating in the read-along. So let me start by talking about how I plan to participate in this. I'm going to be reading the whole thing in 2025, and I'm going to create a playlist, a little mini-series of my reflections on Marcel Proust. I'm going to go volume by volume, at the very least, if not more often than that. But before we get too deep into it, I thought, for those of you who maybe have considered reading Marcel Proust, or you've always wanted to try it, and you've been a little intimidated or fearful or trepidatious, and you're not sure if this is your cup of tea, or that whether you have the time to invest in such a big project, I thought it would be good to start and with this initial video to talk a bit about how to get started with Proust and how to decide whether you want to continue. So let me first take up the topic of why is Marcel Proust worth reading? Well, for number one, this novel, if you think of the whole 7 volumes as one novel, it's one of the pinnacles of 20th century modernist literature. There's just no doubt about that. Some people think it's the greatest work of modernism. It's right up there with the work of Virginia Woolf and James Joyce and Thomas Mann. It's basically essential reading that way. But you never just want to read a book to say you've read it or to check it off your bucket list. That's, to me, not enough of a reason, especially when it's such a gargantuan novel. Like, you have to really want to do it and stick to it. But that is one reason, because if it's a cultural touchstone and so forth. But I think even more importantly than that, as you read the novel, you'll find that it's meditations on time and memory, on love and jealousy. It's commentary on the social customs of the Belle Epoque in France, the art and music and literature of the time. This can all change your life. It's the kind of book that can make you see the world with new eyes. It can make you appreciate life in new ways. And it did that for me, and it might do it for you. In fact, Alain de Botton, is that his name, wrote a book, How Proust Can Change Your Life. I wouldn't give that book a high recommendation, but it was a pretty good read, and I totally get the title. The philosophy in there, the psychology, it's just a novel that's so rich and deep and immersive that it really can change your life. Another reason to read Proust, this novel is the antithesis of short attention span culture. You do not swipe and scroll Marcel Proust, and you will not last very long. This is not for TikTok generation. So if you don't like that kind of garbage and you want to almost rebel and go in the opposite direction, this guy is your ally for sure. So it's the kind of book that will teach you almost how to read again. I really do believe that we need more of that, more immersion in great books like this. And one other afterthought here is I believe that Marcel Proust might have more appeal to some personality types than other personality types. It's just an armchair theory of mine. Like, I consider myself an introvert, right? I feel like this is a book for introverts. And maybe extroverts might have a much harder time with it. Social butterflies and people like that, they might struggle a little bit more. I don't know. I could be proven wrong. Let me know in the comments what you think about that. But I feel like I know that this book, this novel, tapped into something deep in me, like some novels have, and other novels don't, that other people love. So, it might just be, if this book doesn't hit you, that might be one reason why. Or if you're a certain personality type combination, you might have to make accommodations. You might have to take some extra strides in order to get some value, more value out of the book. Anyway, just a thought. Now, let's say you're willing to maybe test the waters and think that, let's try Proust. Well, one decision you have to make is which translation to read. So the first translation is by Charles Kenneth Scott Moncrief, C.K. Scott Moncrief, he's known as. He began working on this translation even before Proust had finished writing the book. But Moncrief didn't complete the translation. He died in 1930 before he got through the final volume of it. So his translation work was completed by other translators, but it's known as the C.K. Scott Moncrief translation. And this translation is legendary. It's got a very high reputation as a work of great literature in its own right. Even if you didn't even know it was a translation, people just regard it that highly. It is written in very ornate Edwardian prose. It's kind of flowery, and it's, 100 years old, more or less, right? So just keep that in mind. Now, after the Moncrief translation, in the 1980s, Terence Kilmartin revised and corrected the Moncrief translation. And this was based on more accurate, more complete French editions of In Search of Lost Time. And after that, D.J. Enright revised Kilmartin's work. So there are these different gradations of the Moncrief translation, but to keep it simplified, you basically have the Moncrief translation going back about 100 years with later revisions and edits and corrections. And then you have a new series of translations that appeared in the 2000s. This is the first volume, Swan's Way, which was first printed it's a Penguin Deluxe Classics edition. 2002 was the copyright on this. And this Penguin Deluxe Classics edition was edited by Christopher Prendergast. And he did something different this time in that each of the 7 volumes of the novel are translated by different translators. So you have 7 translators, a team. And the first book, Swan's Way, which I'm holding here, was translated by Lydia Davis. Okay, so I have not read, I'm currently reading this one. I'm going to read this edition throughout 2025. I will let you know what I think of the other translators. It's a little bit of a concern of mine. Am I going to feel like some kind of jarring difference between translators as I move from book to book? I hope not. I hope there's a feeling of continuity. We will find out. But it also might be a good thing. So the jury's out on that. So basically, to review here, you've got Moncrief, and then you have the new edition edited by Prendergast with a team of 7 translators, starting with Lydia Davis. Okay, now, just to give you a little flavor, so if you're thinking about, okay, which translation do I have to, do I want to read, that's basically a decision you have to make. Like, pick a translation that you want to read. Let me read the first paragraph of the novel to you in both translations, and we can compare and contrast. And I have not done this yet, so this is sort of a real-time experiment. We'll start with, this is the Penguin Classics cloth-bound edition of the Moncrief translation. And we'll start with paragraph 1. It's a long paragraph. That's Proust's way. Just get used to it. Moncrief titles the first chapter of this book Overture. For a long time, I used to go to bed early. Sometimes, when I had put out my candle, my eyes would close so quickly that I had not even time to say, "I'm going to sleep." And half an hour later, the thought that it was time to go to sleep would awaken me. I would try to put away the book, which I imagined was still in my hands, and to blow out the light. I had been thinking all the time, while I was asleep, of what I had just been reading, but my thoughts had run into a channel of their own, until I myself seemed actually to have become the subject of my book. A church, a quartet, the rivalry between Francois I and Charles V. This impression would persist for some moments after I was awake. It did not disturb my mind, but it lay like scales upon my eyes and prevented them from registering the fact that the candle was no longer burning. Then it would begin to seem unintelligible, as the thoughts of a former existence must be to a reincarnate spirit. The subject of my book would separate itself from me, leaving me free to choose whether I would form part of it or no. And at the same time, my sight would return, and I would be astonished to find myself in a state of darkness, pleasant and restful enough for the eyes, and even more, perhaps, for my mind, to which it appeared incomprehensible, without a cause, a matter dark indeed. That's the Moncrief first paragraph. And now we'll turn to the Lydia Davis translation, and we'll read the first paragraph here. For a long time, I went to bed early. Sometimes, my candle scarcely out, my eyes would close so quickly that I did not have time to say to myself, "I'm falling asleep." And half an hour later, the thought that it was time to try to sleep would wake me. I wanted to put down the book I thought I still had in my hands and blow out my light. I had not ceased while sleeping to form reflections on what I had just read, but these reflections had taken a rather peculiar turn. It seemed to me that I myself was what the book was talking about. A church, a quartet, the rivalry between Francois I and Charles V. This belief lived on for a few seconds after my waking. It did not shock my reason, but lay heavy like scales on my eyes, and kept them from realizing that the candlestick was no longer lit. Then it began to grow unintelligible to me, as after metempsychosis do the thoughts of an earlier existence. The subject of the book detached itself from me. I was free to apply myself to it or not. Immediately, I recovered my sight, and I was amazed to find a darkness around me, soft and restful for my eyes, but perhaps even more so for my mind, to which it appeared a thing without cause, incomprehensible, a thing truly dark. I would ask myself what time it might be. I could hear the whistling of the trains, which remote or nearby, like the singing of a bird in a forest, plotting the distances, described to me the extent of the deserted countryside where the traveler hastens toward the nearest station, and the little road he is following will be engraved on his memory by the excitement he owes to new places, to unaccustomed activities, to the recent conversation and the farewells under the unfamiliar lamp that follow him still through the silence of the night, to the imminent sweetness of his return. Well, you notice one thing right there is Lydia Davis's first paragraph is a few sentences or one long sentence longer than the Moncrief. So if I turn back to Moncrief, let's pick up where we left off there. This is back to the Moncrief, just to sort of finish this up. I would ask myself what o'clock it could be. I could hear the whistling of trains, which now nearer and now farther off, punctuating the distance like the note of a bird in a forest, showed me in perspective the deserted countryside through which a traveler would be hurrying towards the nearest station, the path that he followed being fixed forever in his memory by the general excitement due to being in a strange place, to doing unusual things, to the last words of conversation, to farewells exchanged beneath an unfamiliar lamp which echoed still in his ears amid the silence of the night, and to the delightful prospect of being once again at home. Okay, can you hear any differences there? Now, you may not be able to judge based on the first paragraph which translation you want to go in, or it might be very clear to you. But if you have the opportunity, I would read a few pages of each translation and then make up your mind. Ultimately, I don't think it matters a whole lot because the Moncrief translation, which I read my first time through Proust, is incredible. I mean, it was an incredible reading experience. So far, the Lydia Davis translation, I'm liking a heck of a lot. I really think it's super good, and I'll explain why in future videos. But that's you can't really go wrong. But if you have a strong feeling, you might want to decide up front which translation to go with. I think in general, the newer translation, this Penguin Deluxe Classics, is supposed to be written in more modern English. It's supposed to be a bit more faithful to the length and rhythm of Proust's sentences, and it seems to be a little more direct that way. Whereas the Moncrief one advantage of the Moncrief is it's more contemporaneous with Proust. So it's kind of like English and French in the same time period, and there's some charm to that. Okay, now let me give you some advice or suggestions. If you think you want to commit to reading In Search of Lost Time, before you commit, I would suggest you read the Overture chapter. And this is what Moncrief calls it. Now, the Overture chapter is going to run you, let me see how long this is. It starts on page 7 and goes to page 56. So about, 40 pages in this edition. In Lydia Davis, she doesn't call it Overture. She just calls it Cambrai parts 1 and 2. So the equivalent of the overture chapter would be from pages 3 to 49. So in this edition, it's about, 46 pages? So roughly 40 pages or so of text. If you read that section or chapter, you will get a strong taste of Proust. You will get a real sense of his style. You can read this in 1 or 2 days, depending on how fast it goes. But it's only 40-some pages, 1 to 3 days, let's say. And if you are enraptured by that section, if you are grabbed by it, you should be good for the long haul. This section will get you to the most famous scene in the novel, in which our narrator, who's reflecting on memory and so forth, gets to the point where he eats the Madeleine cookies and drinking his tea, dipping it in his tea, and that taste opens up his entire past. It's a deja vu. It's kind of like bringing it all back in this blossoming sort of almost like a psychedelic trip of like it all comes flooding back to him. And you will get to that scene if you read the overture chapter. It's towards the end of that chapter. And there's 2 or 3 like extended similes at the end of that, which are just incredible. And, you'll know if you're on the hook by that point or not. Okay? So if you're enraptured by it, you should be good. If you're not quite and the jury's still out, then you'll have to calculate your risk-reward ratio. I would say if you like what you're reading so far, give the next section a try, the Cambrai, like the rest of the Cambrai section or long chapter. And then later in Swann's Way, there's a good, almost half the book is called Swann in Love, which is like its own little novella. And then there's a section at the end. You can read section by section until you make up your mind. But a lot of you might just want to read the first book. The first book, Swann's Way, is the most famous volume of Proust. Probably a lot of people didn't make it farther than that, but they got off the train. But I know, like, if you get to the end of Swann's Way, you should know whether you want to keep going or not. And it's up to you. Proust isn't for everybody, but a lot of you might be captivated by what you read. Now, let's say you're going to go in. You're going to go all in, put all your chips on the table. Okay. Here's some advice. I think you should take your time. Let Proust be your guide as to how quickly or slowly to read him. But I think this is a book that's best consumed slowly. So it's not the kind of book that you're going to read for plot. It's not a page turner in that sense. It's a page turner in a lot of other senses, but not in that sense. This is a book that's much more about character, about psychology, about very close observation and description, very minute, as intricate as you can get. And it goes off on philosophical tangents about art and nature and memory and human relationships. And, later in the book, you get into the Dreyfus Affair and anti-Semitism, and then pretty soon World War I comes up. There's a lot going on. And if you just read slowly, you will, you can't, his sentences are so long, his paragraphs are so long. The sort of social scenes that he describes, like some soiree or whatever, it's going to take you some time to wade through all that, to be able to follow the character voices, to kind of read the situation and so forth, and then to be able to follow him as he goes on these long, extended similes or riffs or tangents or digressions before he comes back to the scene. All that takes time, so you have to read him slowly. That being said, you have to also read them steadily. Keep a steady pace. So if you want to, otherwise you're going to bog down and you're going to sink. So I would say I liked what Randy and Greg advised in their read-along instructions. 10 pages a day. That's an easy enough target to meet. I actually think something more on the order of 15 to 20 pages a day is about ideal, at least for me. That seems to be how I'm reading this volume. I hit my 10-page goal, and then usually I want to keep going. And often it might be like 15, 18, 20, 22 pages, and then I'm done for the night. Because Proust is very long-winded, there's no doubt about that, you need to give him space and time to cast his spell on you. So you can't read like 3 pages a day, 5 pages a day, because I think you'll sort of stall out. Like you have to give him some on-ramp, like give him some time. So I would say 10 to 20 pages should be about the sweet spot. And then you can go up from there or what have you. But if you keep reading it every day, then it's going to accumulate. You're going to feel like you're picking up momentum, steam. And then if you get the sense that your attention span is drifting, then it's time to leave off until tomorrow. One thing, as I'm reading these like 10 to 20 pages a day, like I'm paying attention to points in the text where Proust maybe wraps up a scene or he finishes a long digression and then he's coming back to a scene. These are not always indicated with section breaks or chapter breaks. He often just blends them. He's sometimes within a paragraph, but usually kind of like it ends a paragraph and then the next paragraph will sort of keep going in a new direction. Those are good points to stop and pause and reflect and maybe put it down until the next day. So I look for those points to jump off, and then I'll jump back on the next night. But you have to be patient with Proust, too. That's another guideline. In one sense, very little happens in this novel. It's almost so much of it's like going on in the narrator's head as he's going through his memories and whatnot. But in another sense, every single page is filled with drama and insight. It's just a different way of presenting fiction. This is not a pot boiler, right? It's just not that. And if you go in with that expectation, you're going to be disappointed. But I think if you can learn from Proust, let him teach you how to read the book, you might really, really love it. Anyway, that is my little getting started guide to Proust. I hope it was of some interest and help to you. Let me know in the comments if you've read Proust, if you're thinking about reading Proust, if you're actually starting to read them, what works for you. If you have tips, advice, let us know in the comments. Thanks everybody for watching. And I'm going to start up a new playlist here for this mini series on Proust, and I'll be back with a new video probably when I finish Swan's Way. Thanks.